I learned two things during the 2024 presidential elections. College students will stop for free food, and if you want to register voters, bring cookies. I'm here to talk about Oklahoma Votes, a student-run, nonpartisan organization here on campus. That year, I had the privilege of serving as one of their 2 civic engagement fellows. And dare I say, our sweet treat budget was probably the highest it's ever been. We developed a pretty close working relationship with the employees of Baked Bear, Insomnia Cookies, and Donut King. But behind the joke is a material problem. College students aren't at the polls. But it's not because they don't care. It's because the process feels confusing, distant, or just not made for them. Trust in government and institutions is low, and youth voter turnout is inconsistent. Historically, those aged 18 to 29 have the lowest participation rate among any age group. And Oklahoma actually has the lowest turnout rate among any state in the nation. That number gets even lower when looking at midterm years or local elections, arguably the ones that are the most important to us. So it seems then that civic engagement, whether that be activism, voting, or coalition building, just isn't something that young individuals are interested in. And yet, I think it's fair to say that you and I know my generation has opinions, strong ones even. So in 2024, Oklahoma Votes conducted a survey asking students what issues they cared the most about. Among some of our top responses were things like climate change, mental health, the economy, and the cost of living crisis. So it's obvious that my generation has opinions and that we care. But that's the year I learned something deeper. College students aren't disengaged from the system. Rather, the system is disengaged from them. And a pattern hit me. Every time a student expressed frustration, apathy, or confusion, it wasn't coming from a place of laziness. It was coming from a place of distance, from not feeling spoken to, listened to, or noticed. Everyone tends to assume that young individuals don't care, when in reality they just haven't been invited in. And I've found that the problem presents itself in 3 main categories. The first is that it's too complicated. There are too many barriers in place, whether that be trying to find a polling place within walking distance of campus, or trying to understand the confusing mail-in ballot rules. When I'm tabling, my go-to line is often, "Hi, are you registered to vote?" And on a college campus where over 40% of students are non-residents, I very often get the response, "Oh, I'm not from here, I can't vote," when that couldn't be further from the truth. Frequently, students just aren't aware there are options available to them as out-of-state individuals. And then we have those who claim to say that it doesn't feel relevant. These individuals claim apathy, saying that the process is too partisan and cutthroat, or lacks practical applicability. For these students, it's just better left alone. It often looks like, "Oh, I'm just not that into politics," and a student who looks really uncomfortable speaking about the subject. There was a particular instance when I was tabling in the Union Courtyard, and I stopped a student. Let's call him Mike. Mike was quick to tell me that he wouldn't be voting in the election because it didn't affect him. Having heard that quite often, I handed Mike a voter guide and encouraged him to look over the issues and the candidates and just see if anything spoke to him. Frequently, students just need help taking that first step. And then the third, these are our disillusioned students. These individuals understand the power of civic engagement, but have felt repeatedly let down by the system, time and time again. I distinctly remember a question I was asked when tabling at a student leadership organization's monthly meeting. At the end of the presentation, the student raised their hand and posed one simple question. Why vote when you know what the outcome is going to be? And I wasn't ready for the murmur of approval that came from the rest of the room. But in that moment, disillusionment stopped being this obstacle that we had to overcome and instead became a catalyst to rewrite our story. That idea was the emotional center of our work. It was no longer about convincing students that democracy was perfect, but rather about showing them that it's participatory, designed to work for them. So these 3 forces became our guiding ideas throughout the year. The strategies we implemented in the days leading up to the election had these 3 groups of students at the center of our mission. So first, we had to work to disrupt that confusing process. When students found it to be complicated, we worked to make it seamless. Civic engagement is often perceived as something that requires a mountain of hard work and lots of previous knowledge, when in reality it's simple. We met students where they were, whether that was the dorms, the classrooms, or the flu clinics. My team of just 6 individuals was at 40 events in just 3 months. When a student complained about a barrier, we worked to remove it. We offered registrations for all 50 states, accommodating each state's unique requirements. If a student lived far away from OU and wanted to mail absentee or vote absentee, we got that request form sent out. And if it needed to be notarized before it was sent back, we got it done and mailed it back. Our efforts ingrained civic engagement in the fabric of student life and made it something that was easily accessible. Because it was important to us that Oklahoma Votes be known as the premier nonpartisan organization here on campus. Student leaders knew they could reach out to our organization to get the members of theirs registered, and they often did. In the days leading up to the election, my team helped around 3,000 individuals. And yeah, sometimes that meant helping a student fill out a form in the hallway between lectures. And other times it meant getting a text at 11 p.m. from a student who finally worked up the courage to ask that question. But democracy isn't always a national movement. Sometimes it's just a familiar face in between lectures. These small conversations, the ones that lasted 3 minutes but dismantled 3 years of misunderstandings, became the heartbeat of our work that year. And then we had those who said that it didn't feel interesting. These individuals just needed to be shown how the system affects them. We worked to individualize every single presentation we gave. When we spoke to our fine arts students, we talked about state arts funding. And when we spoke to our football players and our student athletes, we spoke about NIL legislation. Additionally, we built relationships with every group of students we spoke to, establishing a rapport that would lead to honest discussions. Relationship building became a key part of our strategy and is what catapulted our impact. We worked to make civic engagement tangible for every student who had previously claimed apathy. When we reframed the conversation around their lives and not just their singular opinions, something clicked. Relevancy, I learned, is the gateway to responsibility. And as was our responsibility, we remained explicitly nonpartisan throughout it all. Because the job was never to push any particular political agenda or coerce students to vote in any particular way. Rather, it was to encourage engagement and active involvement with our government. On a college campus, we've got a diverse melting pot of different perspectives, demographics, and beliefs. We encouraged everyone to form and express their own opinions. Partisanship was never pushed, and as a result, we created a welcoming, flourishing community. Some of my favorite conversations came from students who whispered their questions like they were confessing something scandalous. Things like, can I vote if I don't know everything? And what even is a primary? And every time my answer remained the same. Yes, you can still vote, and this isn't a test, it's meant to be an invitation. And that was our second disruption, replacing shame with curiosity. That student in the Union Courtyard, Mike, who said he wouldn't be voting, approached me about 20 minutes after our initial interaction. He had a coffee in his hand and said that the Starbucks line was a great place to look over the voter guide I had handed him. After reading something about food stamps in a candidate's platform, he decided he did want to have a say, and he would be casting a ballot come November. College students aren't uninterested. They're just educationally underserved. When intentional efforts are taken, students respond accordingly. And then we have our disillusioned students. That brave student at the monthly meeting described it as trying to build a house with a screwdriver and a hammer as your only tools. And if I'm honest, I couldn't really argue with that logic. So, to make civic engagement enduring, we had to show students their power. It had to stop feeling like a losing battle. We recruited student leaders from across campus and had them share a message about why they vote. We compiled these testimonials into a social media campaign, highlighting the various My Voting Whys. Some of our most powerful My Voting Whys were short. Things like, because my grandma couldn't, or because I want my brother to grow up in a better world. These aren't political statements, they're human ones. And that was where our strategy had utility, so showing individuals the value of civic engagement. When students saw their friends and peers leading the charge, the culture started to shift. It was no longer about outreach and started to feel more like ownership. And that is how we answered our outcome question. It wasn't about whether or not your candidate won. It was about whether or not your beliefs were considered. At that monthly meeting, we chose to make the seemingly unseen impacts of our work tangible. We shared the results of our efforts and just how different the landscape looked, even compared to just a few weeks ago. In the days leading up to the 2024 presidential election, my team helped around 9% of the student body register to vote or request an absentee ballot. Our organization's engagement was through the roof, with our social media accounts hitting record followings. At each event that we hosted, attendance records were broken, unlike anything ever seen before in the history of our organization. Students felt there was a community for them on campus, regardless of political affiliation. I could visibly see the impact my words had on that student and the impact my words had on the room. College students aren't disillusioned. They're not cynics, they're not jaded, and they're not pessimists. At the end of it all, they just want to feel respected to, listened, and heard. And I'm proud to say that Oklahoma Votes did that all year long. Throughout it all, one key ideal became clear. Democracy doesn't fail because people don't care. It fails when we don't meet people where they are. As we tabled weekly across campus in the sweltering heat and the whipping Oklahoma wind, we started recognizing familiar faces. We understood that our job was not just about registering voters. It was about building relationships, creating conversations, and reminding students why their voice mattered. Many individuals assume that young people are impassive to the needs of the country. I counter with this. They're not impassive, just uninformed and underserved. When barriers are removed, engagement becomes the default. When people feel included, belonging in subsequent agency skyrockets. Simply reminding students that they have a view worth sharing is enough to make involvement feel accessible. Across every conversation, whether it started with frustration, apathy, or confusion, the end result was the same. When a student felt seen, they leaned in naturally. At the end of it all, this isn't just a story about college students. It's about the meaningful ways that you and I engage with our communities and the steps we can take to make that engagement last. And maybe that's the real disruption. Reimagining civic engagement not as something institutional, but as something deeply personal. Not as a chore, but as a connection. Not as a distant responsibility that we think about every 4 years, but as a shared cultural habit that we build together. Because what would the national landscape look like if we were able to get 9% of students on every college campus registered to vote? At the start, we talked about civic engagement being many things, from voting to activism to coalition building. At the same time, it's also just sharing a moment with a student on the South Oval. Connection is what made our efforts enduring, and starting this cultural shift is what allowed our strategy to be replicable. So as I reflect on all that I've learned, I leave you with 2 simple lessons. First, register to vote, because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say it at least once. And second, when faced with a seemingly insurmountable problem, I encourage you to stop and reflect. Is it actually insurmountable, or does it just need a free-baked good? Civic responsibility and engagement isn't always a large, sweeping initiative. Sometimes it's a free cookie or a free donut. Because when we make civic engagement digestible, we make it inevitable. Thank you.